law. Well, that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for May 15th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. It seems like just yesterday we weren't sure if there were going to be presidential debates at all. Now, two are on the calendar. The first is in June. We'll talk to Major Garrett, and I've got an essay on two vital qualities necessary for a good debate and a healthy democracy. Inflation will surely come up at the debate. It was down a hair in April. We'll discuss what that means for the Federal Reserve and the pinch that lower-income Americans feel. And why are cocoa prices so high? We'll explain. It doesn't have much to do with presidential politics. We'd already planned to have a discussion with our Sam Vinograd about homeland security threats the next president will face. That's just the kind of thing that they should be asked about at the debate. And what is the state of foreign threats to undermine the 2024 election? There was a hearing about that in Congress today. The former top government official on that issue, Chris Krebs, will join us. In Slovakia, an assassination attempt on the prime minister as he greeted a crowd, shot 5 times. He was flown by helicopter to the hospital where he's fighting for his life. And in Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced new U.S. aid. Finally, a sculpture that allowed people in Dublin to see New Yorkers in real time brought people closer together until they got a little too close. We'll explain. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with a bit of a wrinkle in a presidential campaign that seemed like it wasn't going to change very much, seeing as it was a contest between two men who had competed before. But Wednesday came news that President Biden and former President Donald Trump will debate in just 6 weeks. That's nearly 4.5 months before the general election, before either party holds its national convention, and months before the traditional fall debates usually take place. The first will be on June 27th on CNN. There will be no live audience. Trump and Biden have also agreed to a second debate in September on the 10th on ABC. The Biden campaign proposed this timeline, and in doing so, also informed the Commission on Presidential Debates that it will not participate in the previously announced matchups set to take place in September and October. Both candidates have criticized the commission for scheduling 3 debates after early voting would have already started in the states of Virginia, Minnesota, and South Dakota. Independent candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could make it to the stage, but must clear CNN's qualifications, which are that candidates earn at least 15% in 4 national polls and have their names on enough ballots to win 270 Electoral College votes. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Major, the Biden campaign proposed this timeline. What was their thinking? What was the strategy?
To counteract the perception that the president is too old and lacks the vigor to carry on a presidential debate, and to sort of break him out of the conventional mode that Joe Biden has been in for most of his political life. This is an out-of-the-box presentation of presidential debates so early, historically early in the calendar. And what the Biden campaign wanted to convey more than anything else is it's not afraid to deal with former President Trump on a debate stage. There are other benefits perceived by the Biden re-election campaign. They'll fundraise off this. They'll also, they believe, do what they did with the State of the Union address, drive a hard political message against their lead opponent, former President Trump, and unify the party that right now is less unified than they needed to be to succeed on a path to re-election.
Right. So underlining that idea, as Biden often says, that this is a choice between two people, not a referendum on the incumbent. Why did the Trump campaign say yes so quickly?
Because it had no other choice, John. The former president has been taunting the Biden campaign and, by inference, the president of the United States, accusing him of being unwilling to debate, unable, in the former president's words, to put 2 sentences together. And having laid all that down, the former president knew that he had to accept Biden because he had set a very large and visible, almost marquee standard, any place, anywhere, anytime. And in the negotiations that clearly have gone on behind the scenes for the couple of weeks, they were able to work on this. Personally, John, I would put the June 27th debate rock solid on the calendar. I'm less convinced there will be a second one in September. I think that one is a little bit more tenuous. There will definitely be a first.
Okay. Now, I really want to follow up on that, but I'm more interested in this question to you, Major, which is, what would you want to see to come out of these debates in terms of the two candidates?
The central question there, John, is what could the country learn that it won't know before the election? And I think it won't know unless it gets a question like this to former President Trump. Will you, on this debate stage, unequivocally pledge to serve only one term and not seek re-election in 2028? There are some conservatives who are already writing pieces urging the former president to ask for 2 consecutive terms. So get him on the record on that. And also, instead of asking, will you accept the election results, will you accept the safe harbor date in mid-December when states certified their electoral votes as the definitive answer as to who won the presidential election? Getting the former president on the record on both those questions would give us something we don't currently know. For the President Biden, I would say, what does victory for Israel in Gaza look like? Similarly, what does victory for Ukraine look like? Pin him down on that, because in both places, the country and the world don't know those answers.
Major Garrett in Washington, and we'll come back to that September question later. Major Garrett, thank you so much.
You got it.
Now to some breaking news. The Supreme Court has ruled that Louisiana can use its new proposed congressional map. A lower court recently ruled that elections cannot be held using a new map that includes a second majority black district. But in a 6-3 vote, the court's conservative justices sided with Republican state officials and a group of black voters, letting the newly drawn map stand. The court's 3 liberal justices dissented, saying the justices should have let proceedings play out in the lower courts. Ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas seem to be getting further apart. Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh says he has rejected an Israeli proposal to exclude the militant group in the territory after the war. He added that Hamas demands that ceasefire agreement should end the fighting in Gaza. Hamas accepted a ceasefire proposal brokered by Egypt and Qatar last week. Israel said that deal did not meet its core demands. This comes as the UN says a quarter of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people have been displaced from the southern city of Rafah since last week due to the Israeli operations there. According to the agency, about 600,000 Palestinians have been driven out of Rafah over fears of a full-blown operation. Over 1 million people had been sheltering in the city. Meanwhile, demonstrations were carried out in the West Bank Wednesday on the observance of Nakba, which translates to catastrophe in Arabic. The day marks the displacement of more than 700,000 Palestinians during the creation of Israel 76 years ago. More than double that number have been displaced since the start of the current war. The Prime Minister of Slovakia is in critical condition after he was shot Wednesday in an apparent assassination attempt. Government officials say 50-year-old Robert Fico was shot multiple times in the abdomen while meeting with supporters and has undergone one operation. The suspected gunman was arrested at the scene. There are no reports of additional suspects, and a motive is not yet known. Fico won his 3rd term in October and has been openly against Western support of Ukraine. On day 2 of Antony Blinken's trip to Ukraine, the Secretary of State announced a $2 billion aid package. The announcement comes after Congress passed $60 billion in long-awaited military aid last month. This round of cash will help with weapons delivery and future investments in Ukraine's defense industrial base. Meanwhile, Ukraine is on the defensive. Ukrainian President Zelensky has postponed his foreign travel as Russian troops enter the town of Voshansk. This latest push is part of a larger incursion into Ukraine's northeast, the most significant since the start of its full-scale invasion. Inflation has turned back down after 2 straight months of increases. The April increase in prices came at 3.4%. That's way down from 9.1% peak 2 years ago. But the rate still hasn't managed to return to 3%, which we hit last June, and it's still above the Fed's target of 2%. Several grocery prices went down from March to April, among them poultry, eggs, milk, and vegetables. Health insurance is also down 11.6% in the last year, but car insurance is up 22.6%. To help us understand these numbers is Gina Smilik. She's a New York Times reporter covering the Federal Reserve and the economy. Good to be with you again. Let's start with car insurance. Why are those numbers elevated?
Yes, we have seen this to be a consistent trend in the car insurance market. You really saw a big jump in car prices during the pandemic, and that also affected car parts. Car parts became very expensive. Replacement parts have remained very expensive. And so what we've seen is that these insurance claims are increasingly large. And in order to cover that, car insurers have been jacking up prices. So this is a trend that has been happening for a while. A lot of economists expect that it will last somewhat longer and then eventually peter out. But we are still waiting for that to sort of cross the Rubicon on that one.
So housing costs, they were up 5.5% since last year. And the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, said that this is, quote, a bit of a puzzle. What does that mean, a bit of a puzzle? What does he mean, and what's going on with housing?
So housing, it will surprise no one who's watching this to know, makes up a very big part of the consumer budget. And as a result, it makes up a very big part of the consumer price index inflation basket. It's about 33% of the whole basket, so a third of the whole basket. And for months now, economists have been expecting that measure of housing costs to come down because it is based almost entirely on rent prices because it's trying to capture the consumption cost of housing. And rent prices in the market, new leases have been steadily declining, or at least climbing at a much slower rate in most markets than they previously had been. And so that was expected to feed into this inflation measure over time. But what we're seeing is that it's not happening as quickly as expected. People are not renewing leases as quickly, or else when they are renewing those leases, they are not renewing them at the sort of much lower rates that economists were expecting. And so housing inflation has been a lot stickier for existing rents than people had anticipated. And that has just been a real surprise. And we're still waiting to see when it changes.
And what do you think the Fed will make of these new numbers as they make their judgments about rate decreases?
Yeah, so I think they've got to be breathing a sigh of relief because I think there was a real nervousness that this number was going to be worse than it was. What we saw was that inflation moved down a little bit. It was still sort of looking a little bit stickier around the edges, but it wasn't the kind of really bad inflation report that we've seen for the past 3 months. And so I don't think that this is the kind of thing that's going to change the Fed's mind. I don't think you're going to see the Fed reacting to this by cutting rates immediately, but I do think it's the kind of thing that probably makes them feel a little bit more comfortable with the, reality or expectation that the next move is going to be a rate cut and that it might come as early as this year.
You wrote recently in the Times, or co-wrote a piece in the Times about how high interest rates are hitting poorer Americans the hardest. We sometimes shorthand the talk about the economy in these broad strokes. Explain the disproportionate effect that interest rates have on that portion of our country.
Right. So high interest rates pretty much always hit poor people the hardest, but you can really see that this time around in a couple of places. One is that credit card rates, very, very high right now. And most people in America who have credit card debt, outstanding credit card debt, tend to be a little bit more cash strapped, tend to be from that sort of lower portion of the income spectrum. The other group of people who are really being affected by these high interest rates are folks who want to get into the housing market. If you don't already own a home, you're much more exposed to rent increases. You also, obviously are grappling with the reality that if you take out a mortgage, you're going to be paying these much higher interest rates. And so it's been a real effect in sort of the bottom half of the income distribution. While, and this is the thing that's unusual about this cycle, the real surprise here is the top half of the income distribution is not suffering the way that they usually do from high interest rates this time around. We've seen stock prices be pretty strong recently, and we've seen home prices really be resilient to these increases in interest rates. And so that means that people who own their houses, people who have big investment accounts, they're not doing so badly.
Gina Smilik, Federal Reserve and economy reporter for the New York Times. Thanks as always.
Thanks for having me.
President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris released their 2023 personal financial disclosure reports Wednesday. The Ethics in Government Act mandates the disclosure to avoid conflicts of interest. Harris did disclose a few special gifts she received last year, including a ticket to Beyonce concert gifted to her by the singer herself. She also received tickets from ESPN to a football game at her alma mater, Howard University. But the Independent Office of Government Ethics says neither Biden nor Harris have any conflicts in their report. National security officials testified on Capitol Hill Wednesday about foreign threats to the upcoming presidential election. Former CISA Director Chris Krebs joins us to discuss the biggest concerns this cycle and how the government plans to address them. Plus, many high school seniors in 2020 never got to participate in a big graduation ceremony due to COVID. Now, 4 years later, caution about protests means some won't get a college ceremony either. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off.
That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Barge crashed into a bridge in Galveston, Texas, Wednesday morning, spilling oil into the water. A tugboat pushing 2 barges lost control due to high tides and strong currents, according to local officials. No injuries have been reported, and it's currently unknown how much oil was spilled. The crash also forced a shutdown of the only road accessing a nearby island that is home to Texas A&M Galveston. Citizens of Galveston have now learned what residents of Baltimore know all too well. A bridge accident can happen anywhere and at any time. That was the message on Capitol Hill Wednesday from NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy. She urged bridge owners nationwide to update their safety measures. She also offered additional specifics on the power outages, saying that those occurring the day before the collapse appear to be different from those that caused the accident.
Yesterday, we released our preliminary report, which shows that the Dolly experienced 4 total power outages. Preliminary information indicates that the March 25th blackouts were mechanically distinct from those that occurred on March 26th. 2 were related to routine maintenance in port. 2 were unexpected tripping of circuit breakers on the accident voyage.
Officials told lawmakers they still do not know when the Dolly's crew will be able to leave the ship. They've been on board since the crash happened 6 weeks ago. As for rebuilding the Key Bridge, officials estimate it could cost nearly $2 billion and take 4 years. Opening statements started Wednesday in the corruption trial of New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. Menendez is accused of using his influence to help 3 New Jersey businessmen and acting as an unregistered foreign agent for Egypt. A federal prosecutor painted him as a greedy politician who used his wife as a go-between. The defense disputed those claims, saying Menendez was a lifelong public servant who was betrayed by his wife. Menendez has pleaded not guilty to 16 criminal charges. His wife's trial is scheduled for July. The director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, testified Wednesday on Capitol Hill that the U.S. election system has never been more secure. Nevertheless, foreign adversaries will attempt to undermine our democratic institutions as we get closer to the upcoming presidential election. CISA Director Jen Easterly joined the director of the National Intelligence and an FBI official before the Senate Intelligence Committee to discuss how their respective agencies plan on addressing these concerns. They released a joint report last month outlining the tactics often used by foreign adversaries to influence U.S. elections. They range from creating fake media sites and voice cloning of public figures to manufacturing false security incidents and social media campaigns. For more on all of this, let's bring in CBS News cybersecurity expert Chris Krebs. He's the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, and currently Chief Public Policy Officer at SentinelOne. Chris, good to have you back again. When Jen Easterly says the system is secure, what exactly does that mean to you?
Well, it means that the federal government, working with state and local election officials, have been working hard for 8+ years to ensure that there are security resources out into those that actually administer U.S. elections, which of course are state and local election officials. I think there's an overarching narrative that, yes, there are significant threats out there, that we have China, Russia, Iran, and others that are looking to interfere in our elections, when in fact we've spent significant resources address a number of different vulnerabilities in the system to ensure that it is in fact a resilient, secure process.
And by resilient and secure, are you talking about the actual mechanics of voting and the machines and the ballots and just the nuts and bolts of getting voters, casting the ballots, counting them, and that kind of thing? Is that essentially what you mean?
John, that's exactly right. We have to think about the political process, elections, in 2 distinct areas. One is the technical administration. That's the voting process. When you show up on election day, you cast that ballot, it gets certified or counted and then certified. There are administrative processes on either side of voting. And that's where CISA, working with the FBI and state and local election officials, have spent all those resources over the last several years. There is, however, to your point, a much broader, deeper disinformation and information ecosystem that is being targeted every single day by those in Russia and in China. And like we saw in the 2020 election, the Iranians.
And so let's stay in that second grouping, which seems fuzzier and harder. For example, who's in charge of determining what's fake and hardening those kinds of efforts to undermine public goodwill and information that's being exchanged?
Right. That was a key theme in the hearing today. Ultimately, it's the American people, it's the voters that are going to determine what's real and what's fake. However, the security apparatus, the intelligence community, law enforcement, have the ability to look over there, to look into foreign space at accounts that may be originating and promoting and propagating information that is fake or AI generated. And they can work directly with the social media platforms to flag those accounts. It's not content, it's accounts. Also, like we did in 2020, when we were aware that Iranians were posing as the Proud Boys and intimidating voters and threatening voters to vote a certain way, the government has the ability and call that activity out, call those campaigns out, and ensure that the American people have information in their hands to make the right decisions. And secondly, you have CISA, who has what they call rumor versus reality, that is used to provide authoritative information on security practices and controls that are in place around those technical systems that we just talked about to ensure that you do have a safe, secure, resilient election.
Former CISA director and CBS News cybersecurity expert Chris Krebs. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thanks, John.
Overdose deaths fell in 2023, the first decline in these numbers since 2018. Preliminary data from the CDC estimates roughly 107,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. That's down 3% from the year before. Overdoses due to the synthetic opioid fentanyl dipped slightly, but the drug still remains the leading cause of overdose deaths. Experts didn't specify what drove the decline, but naloxone, a drug that reverses opioid overdoses, is more available now, and that could be one reason. 22 million doses of Narcan were distributed in the U.S. and Canada last year. The FDA has approved self-test kits that allow people to screen for HPV in hopes of detecting cervical cancer earlier. The first test will be reserved for clinical use, with doctors allowing patients to privately swab themselves. A second at-home option is expected this summer. This will increase testing for patients who do not have access to gynecologists or are uncomfortable with the process. According to the CDC, more than 11,000 women are diagnosed with cervical cancer each year, and roughly 4,000 of those cases are fatal. HPV is the known cause of more than 95% of cervical cancer cases. Less than 1 week after opening sculptures featuring a live stream between New York and Dublin were opened, they have now been closed due to unruly behavior. The portal was turned off Tuesday after viral videos emerged showing people on both sides flashing body parts, making obscene gestures, and showing disturbing images on their phones. Broadcasters in Dublin say the behavior could be partially caused by the portal's distance to Talbot Street, an area known for excessive drinking and drug use. New York's portal is expected to be turned back on by the end of the week with newly added safeguards to keep the experience light and fun. Turns out, from the U.S. to Ireland, the language of hooliganism is universal. Coming up, it's the hardest job in the world, the American presidency. But what are some of the issues the president faces that makes it so hard? Our national security contributor will discuss some of the major challenges the winner of the November election will face. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Dickerson, here are some additions to our top stories. President Biden and former President Trump have agreed to debate in June and September. The agreement came together after a flurry of social media posts and competing proposals between the two. The June debate is notably scheduled for before the Republican and Democratic nominating conventions. Prime Minister Robert Fico of Slovakia was shot Wednesday, leaving him in critical condition. The country's foreign minister called the attack an assassination attempt. At least one suspect was detained at the scene. No word yet on a possible motive. The temporary pier to get humanitarian aid into Gaza by sea could be ready in days. Once that happens, the U.S. military expects about 90 truckloads of aid per day into Gaza initially, and as many as 150 trucks once the operation reaches full capacity. Before the war, more than 500 trucks of aid entered Gaza daily. We talked earlier in the report about foreign threats to the U.S., to the upcoming U.S. election, I should say, but national security threats won't end when the election does. Between dual overseas wars, rising competition with China, and a struggle to find consensus on the southern border, the next president will be tasked with handling many of the issues facing the national security officials in his administration. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins me now. She's a former assistant secretary for counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security. Sam, thank you for joining us. We have a debate coming up, too, so these issues will be presented in June, I hope, anyway, to the candidates. Let's start with Israel. How do the two differ in their policies with respect to that?
Well, one thing the two candidates have in common is commitment to Israel's security. Where they differ, John, is how they seek to achieve that. We have President Trump, who has really blindly supported Israeli leadership in whatever they choose to do. President Biden has made extremely clear that his commitment to Israel is ironclad, but he has not been afraid to tell Israeli officials like Prime Minister Netanyahu when he, for example, disagrees with going into Rafah or wants to see more humanitarian aid go in. At the same time, President Trump and President Biden, former President Trump and President Biden differ when it comes to what President Biden believes should be a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mr. Trump did put forward a quote-unquote two-state proposal during his administration, which was almost immediately rejected by the Palestinians, whereas President Biden has tried to lay out a path towards a more viable two-state solution that would be more acceptable to the Palestinians and ultimately more in their interests.
And that essentially, a two-state solution matters because that, everyone hopes, will create a situation of stability that won't lead to constant ongoing conflict in the region.
President Biden and his national security team, and I was a part of that, do see a two-state solution as ultimately in the security interests of the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. There is an assessment. We heard, for example, Secretary Blinken make comments that Hamas is reconstituting, that the current status quo is breeding so many security vulnerabilities for Israel that it isn't sustainable, whereas Mr. Trump has instead really tried to not listen to Palestinian demands for statehood, really tried to diminish security and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian Authority. So that would be different than what we're seeing today under the Biden administration.
Let's zoom all the way over to China, another challenge that the next president will face, as the current one does, of course. What's the biggest mistake that whoever's in office could make in the next term?
Well, just here at home, as a former Homeland Security official, if we see a repeat of the frankly racist rhetoric about the China virus and tropes about Asia as we are engaged in strategic competition with China, that will likely have security implications here in the homeland. So I worry about Mr. Trump coming back into office and using language somehow loosely related to our strategic competition in China that could intentionally or unintentionally reverberate with security implications in the U.S. As we look overseas, John, I do worry about comments about Taiwan that Mr. Trump has made and whether a Trump administration would come to the defense of Taiwan if the People's Republic of China chose to move against it. In the long term, if China feels emboldened to really take what it wants, that won't stop with Taiwan. And the People's Republic of China needs to understand what red lines are so that they don't become increasingly aggressive globally.
And finally, the Homeland Security issue that's on a lot of voters' minds is the border, of course. Help us understand the Homeland Security implications of the situation at the border.
Well, from my assessment, we are seeing a crisis at our border. December 2023 had over 300,000 encounters at the southwest border. Law enforcement is being overwhelmed. There's a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding. And ultimately, we are seeing an increased volume of apprehensions at our southwest border, as well as an increase in threats. And what I mean by that, John, is historically the majority of irregular migrants showing up at our border came from Mexico and Central America. We are now seeing a much broader range of countries of origin. And with that, we do assess that terrorists may seek to exploit irregular migration pathways to, for example, push operatives into the United States or bad actors to exploit those vulnerabilities more generally. And that's why, for whomever is president in 2025 and beyond, we need to really invest in screening and vetting capabilities to keep the bad guys out and need to work with countries all around the world to try to stop their citizens from showing up at the southwest border in the first place.
Sam Vinograd, thanks so much for being with us, Sam. A bipartisan group of senators is pushing for Congress to spend at least $32 billion to develop and safeguard artificial intelligence. Leading the push is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
We're going to expect the committees to lay down a base of bipartisan policy that will harness AI's potential while safeguarding its risks, using our roadmap as a foundation to build on.
The proposal could create national data privacy laws that would give consumers greater control over their personal information. It may also help regulate AI companies' use of personal data. The head of the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is apologizing for a toxic workplace culture at the agency. Earlier this month, an independent report found evidence of widespread sexual harassment and employee mistreatment. Chairman Martin Gruenberg spoke before the House Financial Services Committee Wednesday, saying he accepts responsibility.
I again personally want to apologize and express how deeply sorry I am. I also acknowledge my own failures as chairman, both in failing to recognize how my temperament in meetings impacted others and for not having identified the deeper cultural issues at the FDIC.
Gruenberg also said he will create an Office of Professional Responsibility and hire a third-party expert to track progress on company culture. Still, multiple Republican lawmakers have called on the chairman to resign. The Department of Justice says Boeing has violated a $2.5 billion settlement that allowed the company to avoid criminal prosecution. The plane maker was accused of misleading regulators after 737 MAX jet crashes in 2018 and 2017 in Indonesia and Ethiopia, respectively, killing 346 people. Boeing says it believes it has honored the agreement. The DOJ wrote in a letter Tuesday that Boeing breached its obligations by, quote, failing to design, implement, and enforce a compliance and ethics program to prevent and detect violations of U.S. fraud laws. It's unclear if the DOJ will pursue criminal charges. The letter did not mention any specific incidents of alleged fraud. During the onset of the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S., millions of high school students were deprived of their graduation ceremonies. in the name of safety. Now, many of those same students may have their college graduations taken away due to protests over the war in Gaza. Our Meg Oliver reports on the no graduation generation.
Is this the full circle moment you were dreading?
Oh, absolutely.
Today, 22-year-old Sadie Reynolds was supposed to enjoy the pomp and circumstance of Columbia University's big event. But just like her high school graduation, it was canceled.
I feel cheated and so disrespected, honestly, because throughout the times that the encampment was there, the administration was sending emails saying to, please relocate or to take everything down because the seniors want to graduate.
In wake of protests on campus, the University of Southern California also canceled their main commencement, citing safety concerns. Nationwide, more than 2,000 people, many of them students, have been arrested at multiple campuses. Protesters set up encampments and called for universities to divest from Israel over the country's actions since the Hamas attack last year on October 7th. Columbia is holding smaller ceremonies for students. At this one last Friday, a student ripped up her diploma in protest and showed her cap allegedly decorated with a Palestinian prisoner's name.
This was the redemption from the COVID graduation that didn't happen, and now it's not happening either.
Aviva Patz is Sadie's mom, also a graduate of Columbia University.
Well, now I'm getting emotional thinking about it. She, she would have just felt like $1 million. She would have felt like I'm a Columbia University graduate.
On average, an Ivy League education, including room and board, costs more than $300,000, forcing many families to take out multiple loans.
It's just again, a slap in the face, especially to people who are paying full tuition, to people who are really struggling to pay. And also, especially for the last 2 weeks, I wasn't able to access Columbia's campus, which is part of why I am paying so much tuition.
An Ivy League education with an anticlimactic end. Meg Oliver, CBS News, New York.
Chocolate lovers are being hit by higher cocoa prices. What's driving these prices and what chocolate brands are doing to adapt? That's ahead. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
we are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Earlier in the program, we talked about what's keeping prices high, but we wanted to look at one item in particular, chocolate. Cocoa prices have skyrocketed in recent months, and over the past year, they've more than doubled from nearly $3,000 per ton last May to $7,000. Our Torian Small has been looking into this for the past couple of days. Torian, I was just interested because there's so much going on here. So why are these prices rising?
Yeah, in short, it's really poor cocoa crop in both Ghana and the Ivory Coast. These West African countries really produce about 70% of cocoa exports globally, right? And they've faced over this past year or so, bad weather produced by climate change. They've experienced, at least since January, really tough heat waves that have been a drag on farmers, these local farmers out there, and then torrential downpours that have been really unrelenting. That causes awful diseases to their crops. We've seen, I think it's black rot in some of those pods, as well as swollen roots. And because of that, I talked to Steve Westridge, one of the lead tropical commodities researcher, and he says we're seeing a supply deficit this year of about 440,000 tons of cocoa. A lot.
Wow. So when we talk about inflation, it often happens in political terms, but this has nothing to do with, this has to do with what's happening on an entirely different continent. So what is the effect on chocolate makers of this?
They're paying more because a lack of supply there. They have to pay more for this chocolate. And we're seeing it trickle down to even at the local level here in New York. Chocolate is more expensive. I talked to the owner of Lilac Chocolate. They say they're the oldest chocolate makers in Manhattan, and they're doing a lot of belt tightening. They last year bought about 120,000 tons of cocoa. At this price, that's pretty pricey. Take a listen to what he had to say about cutting costs this time around.
To stay even, we'd have to do 30% price increases. We just can't do that. We're doing some small price increases on products that aren't profitable, but by and large, we're just going to absorb it. So it's just going to be a very tough year.
No pun intended, but they're eating a lot of these cost increases, and they're looking to avoid doing like staff cuts, which is probably the largest expense because they're making handmade chocolate here. No machinery, really. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting on their own.
So if this is a problem that is caused by nature and also the farming practices, how quickly does it get fixed, or are there things that can be done to change the situation?
Researchers have a pretty bleak outlook on the future of chocolate. They think the commodity will or cocoa, they think chocolate moving forward is going to just cost a little bit more. That's something that customers will just have to, deal with. Yeah. But they think, especially in West Africa, there are some ways that government intervention can help. So farmers out there, the prices or the sale of cocoa out there is dictated by the government, the local government out there. So if they look at, in South America, some of those countries that are also producing cocoa, that's more commercially oriented. They have better fertilizer. They have more machinery that could help with that. These local farmers, and there are thousands of farmers across West Africa doing a lot of the heavy lifting on their own without much help from the government.
Torian Small, thanks very much. And you got a good, field trip in there.
Got some chocolate for you.
Yeah, it's very nice. Still to come, presidential debates have become a standard part of the four-year contest. But this contest is anything but standard. With two presidential debates finally on the calendar, the two qualifications for a good debate are also two issues totally up for grabs in American democracy right now. You're streaming The Daily Report.
to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on the groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
The presidential debates in 2024 will be the first ones where the debates don't just help voters make their choice, but where the debates themselves display the core challenges to American democracy. These contests are normal four-year exercises in the modern campaign, but this campaign is anything but normal. Our political system faces unprecedented challenges in two key areas: the idea of verifiable facts and authority of institutions. What do I mean? Well, if the debate moderator says the 2020 election was not stolen, Donald Trump and his supporters would say the moderator was biased. That's because, according to polls, a majority of Trump's party chooses to not believe in the verifiable fact that the election was valid. This persists despite the fact that over 60 court cases challenging the election were dismissed, and despite election officials, governors, state legislatures, and even Trump's own administration have affirmed the integrity of the results. But Trump and his supporters don't believe in the authority of those authorities that have upheld this fact. They have also deemed illegitimate the multiple jurisdictions where Trump is on trial. The Speaker of the House did that just yesterday. When senior Republicans have been asked if they will abide by the 2024 election outcome, they have ducked the question. Facts, the rule of law, and free and fair elections are the core of democracy. You can't just believe them only when they serve your team. And you can't swear a valid oath to protect those things when you've become practiced at undermining them. These are the challenges of facts and authority in our current moment. A debate relies on facts and authority, too. Facts get at truths for the voter. For a job where a president can't just make up stuff because reality, in the form of a global pandemic or national security threat, will smash petty fictions soon enough. So how does a debate stick to its purpose with facts? By empowering a moderator with authority. But a moderator only has authority if all participants agree that he or she does, just like with laws and election outcomes. If facts and authority are upheld, then there's a chance that these will be illuminating debates, which means they will also illuminate how dangerous it is for facts and authority to be cast aside so regularly when the stakes are much higher. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The U.S. intelligence community is warning about potential foreign threats to the upcoming presidential election. Former CISA Director Chris Krebs joins us to discuss what officials will be looking out for over the next few months. Threats to our election system are just one of many national security issues the next U.S. president, whoever it may be, will have to deal with. We'll take a look at the approach candidates could take when it comes to the border in China. And the prospect of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is becoming more and more unlikely as the Israeli military closes in on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. We'll have the latest on the war. You're streaming CBS News.